Is ready to know who I am. I am Monica Schaub. I'm the co-founder here in Washington County. We are the Work and Play Disability Community Center. If you want to know more about us and who we are and what we do, think of us as a central hub. We host events, programs to connect people with valuable resources, like the one we have today. And we will love to invite you to join us at the upcoming DD Hero Walk. It'll be October 5th in Milan, Michigan. And what that is our annual fundraiser. And what it does is supports, it brings the community together, and also it supports the nonprofit, which allows us to bring resources like this today. So I will go ahead and let you take the lead, Jenny. You're the expert in disability planning. I know this is a much needed resource. And everybody, thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you so much for taking your time out of your evening tonight. Hopefully you all had time to get home from work and grab dinner. So I'm going to try to make this as effective tonight as possible. I want to try to address your questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. I will post a link at the very end where you can reach out to me. And the reason why I do that is because everybody's situation is different. You know, it's kind of like with autism. If you know one child with autism, you know one child with autism. Everyone's different. And that's how it is with planning as well. We all are in different stages of planning. We have some clients that I work with who have a 3-year-old and it was a surprise Down syndrome diagnosis. And I have other families who have a 46-year-old son with Down syndrome. And I serve all disabilities and across the country. So every state, we have resources for every state. So a little bit about us. We are CaringTide. We're a disability planning organization. And I wanted to start out with this disclaimer first. CaringTide respects every individual's right to express who they are. In one-on-one discussions, we will use person-first or identity-first language based on the person's preference. In group settings, we will use a mix of the two in the hopes of having everyone feel like they are being included and respected. And this is really important. I have 4 children. I'll just show you my little family. 4 children, and my second son, Jackson, in the gray sweater vest, he has a chromosome duplication. It's called 7q11.23 duplication. He also has autism. He was the first diagnosed in Utah with that chromosome duplication and the 11th in the world. And so I have professionally and personally been on this journey for many years. Professionally, I ran a nonprofit. I was the executive director for Duplication Cares. It's a global nonprofit that helps connect families with research and resources and tools and support. And then also in Utah, I was boots on the ground here with families for the past 6 years. So this is a mission, a passion for me. I live this and breathe this in my professional life and my personal life. And while he's the one that has the most significant disabilities, all of my children have some sort of mental health or ADHD diagnosis that also impacts them. And so this is something that disability planning our approach is a little bit different than other organizations. We're holistic, meaning we address planning for every member of the family, because a lot of my kids have a lot of PTSD from actually being raised with a brother who was kind of volatile when they were growing up. And so it's really impacted the whole family. And when we look at disability planning, we really try to look at the needs of the entire family. I want to introduce you to our founder. This is Brady Murray, and he has 11 children. And that's even a lot by Utah standards. He has 4 biological children, and then he has 7 adopted children, most recently 4 siblings from Colombia. And he's just on his way next week to Armenia to work with an orphanage there to try to promote adoption for kids with Down syndrome in Armenia. So this is also a passion for him. And one day, well, let me tell you, he has 2 kids with Down syndrome. He has Nash and Cooper. Nash is 17. And when Andrea said to him one day, you know, you've done a great job. You've been a certified financial planner for 22 years. And that CHSNC is a chartered special needs consultant. Brady and I are both chartered special needs consultants. You've done a great job navigating all of this with finances, but what are we going to do when we're no longer here to care for Nash and Cooper? And so that is how CaringTide started, is he wanted to try to find an organization out there that could help him with all of the different areas of planning. Now, there are great financial planners out there. There's great special needs attorneys out there, but he couldn't find anyone that could do all the things. And that's why he developed CaringTide, is so that we could look at that holistic approach for families and really look at every single area. So it's not just the IEP, it's not just the special needs trust, it's not just the ABLE account. What we try to help families do is weave all of these different pieces of planning together, and so they can have a really great, successful plan. Now, every plan, as a mom, I try to do this planning and put this in place for families and for my own family, I should say. And a plan can only be as good as it is, because once I pass away, it's really out of my control, right? And so this is why it's so important to make sure we're looking at all of the different areas of planning. So let's look at how it starts. A lot of families just look at that estate plan or the financial resources, but really when we're doing a holistic plan for families, it's everything. It's the family resources, it's the estate planning, and then it's also the financial strategies. And this is one of the questions that we hear from families quite often. When we look at the plans, they just say, well, I'm not sure how to tackle this problem that I have. I don't have a guardian after I pass away. My child is the child with a disability is an only child, and so I don't have anyone, or I don't have resources to fund my special needs trust. How am I going to do that? And so that's what we really do, is we meet families where they are, and we try to look at their situation and what's impacting them, and then we try to help them find answers. So the number one concern we hear from parents is, who will care for my child if I can't? And I want you to think about that for a moment, because we always think of, well, when I pass away, but we want to change that, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when I can't. I wanted to share a personal experience. About 5 years ago, my husband, who is a successful leader in technology, there's no concerns there. We're just going about our life. He was diagnosed with cancer. And immediately when I processed that diagnosis, I thought, oh my gosh, is our life insurance in place? Like, what would I do if he passed away? He was the majority breadwinner for our family. And so that's when I really got serious about a life care plan. So what is a life care plan? It's a coordinated strategy to incorporate family goals, individual goals, and a plan for achieving these desired successful outcomes, with an eye planning for the individual with unique challenges. So that's a big sentence, big paragraph, but basically what that means is we want to look at every individual in your family and plan for them. We want to plan for you. It's that whole analogy of, I need to put my own oxygen mask on first before I can care for everyone else around me. And I can't just plan for Jackson. I have to be able to plan for every other member of my family as well, and their needs. When we look at basic planning, there's only 2 out of 3 Americans, two of three American adults do not have a will. And so our families are different, and our children, like Jackson, depend upon us to make sure we have our ducks in a row and make sure that we have this planning done. Now, it can be overwhelming. I know that. And so we want to break it down into bite-sized pieces for you. And the whole premise, and the reason why I'm so grateful for Mona to have her let us do this tonight, is because we don't want families to be overwhelmed. We truly just want every family in America to have this planning, and that's why we do these free educational webinars, is because even if you are paycheck to paycheck, or even if you have a ton of assets and resources, there is something that every single one of us can do to try to take our next right step forward and to do this planning. So let's go through a couple of reasons why people have not done their planning. So we hear a lot, well, I'm too busy dealing with everyday life. And this is really valid, because there was a period of time where Jackson was like 6th grade to junior in high school, and he's now 24. And it was seriously just white knuckling it every day, trying to get through the day. And so the last thing I had on my mind was sitting down trying to figure out Social Security. And so that's valid. And so that's what the role of our organization is to help you take that next right step and find those bite-sized pieces to mark off on the list. I hear a lot of families when I meet with them across the country, they'll say, well, there's siblings that will take care of them. And so that's one thing that we have to be aware of is, yes, that's fantastic if they're siblings, and it's fantastic if they want to take on that responsibility of caring for our loved one. But there's a lot of times where it might not be a good fit. For instance, my youngest child could probably do it, but my second son, it probably wouldn't be a good fit, and it wouldn't be a healthy situation for either boy. So we really have to evaluate each of our kids' situations and not put that on them if that's not something that is in the best interest of both individuals. A lot of people say it's overwhelming and I don't know where to begin, or I don't know how to begin. And a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. For instance, you hear Social Security, I can only have $2,000, which again, we'll talk about later tonight. But there's other types of Social Security that are not dependent upon that $2,000 threshold. You know, it's called SSDI. And so we'll talk about the differences of that tonight, but a lot of families don't ever apply because they don't think they will qualify. A lot of families don't think that they can afford to do it. They don't think they can afford the planning. And so again, there's things that we can do, even as a fresh out of college couple. Life insurance was really important to us. And so we found a tool to help us get that wasn't very expensive and that gave our family protection right out of college. What about I have a trust, but I'm unable to, or I don't know how to fund it? And we'll talk about that as well, because it's really important. Some families spend thousands of dollars on a trust, but unless they fund the trust or have a plan of how they're going to fund the trust, it's really just an expensive set of papers. And it doesn't mean a whole lot if there's not any money that can go into funding your trust. So here's some basic planning questions that I want every family or every person listening to think about. And everybody's situation is going to be different. So this is Brady and his wife, Andrea, picking up Cooper after they adopted him from China. And I want you to think about, where are we today? Where's your family today? Are you paycheck to paycheck? Do you have a lot of planning done? Do you feel like you can handle when the school bus stops coming? Do you feel like you are really struggling with a medically fragile child? What does your situation look like? Then where do you want to go? What is your vision? What's your vision for yourself and also the vision you have for your loved one? And then how are you going to get there? We can all wish and hope and dream, but unless we have an actionable plan, how are we going to do it? So we have to have a plan in place, and it's those three anchors that I talked about with the estate planning, the financial strategy, and family resources. And we'll talk about family resources, but that's like things like, you know, an emergency plan, transitioning to adulthood, transitioning to adult health care, person-centered planning, maturation, finding people in your community like Mona's organization that can help you. It's all of the pieces. And as you work those pieces together, you can create a really beautiful plan that dovetails together. Now watch that middle logo, our CaringTide logo is going to change into these circles. And it's because our plan is always changing. At the very first of the webinar, before some of you were joining, I was talking about how our plans always change. For instance, my special needs trust, I've changed it 3 times over the course of Jackson's life, and Brady has changed his special needs trust 4 times. And the reason for that is, think about your families. You're leaving the kids to grandma, you're leaving the kids to your sister. Well, those relationships change. People get divorced, relationships deteriorate. Maybe a person who was once going to be a fantastic caregiver, their life circumstances has made it and so that they wouldn't be able to be the support that your loved one needs. So we always want to be reviewing it. We want to review our financial plan, make sure we're on track to even be able to retire. Some parents I work with across the country say, gosh, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to retire because the needs are so high. How am I going to fund this? So that's something that we'll look at too. Now, to get you thinking about planning, here are the timelines. And these are the timelines that are compared for a typical family and then a family like mine. So in orange, this is what like a typical family goes through. You're so excited to have your baby. You're getting them, you know, into preschool and doing all of the things. And then they graduate from high school. and you're helping them with applications and everything that comes with launching your loved one of a neurotypical child. And then you move on to yourself, right? And your kids are living their life, living their best life, and you're focused on retirement and then ultimately you're passing. Well, our family looks a little bit different. I found out Jackson's brain structure anomaly was different at 5 months in utero when I was still pregnant, and that's when our planning started. We started meeting with the perinatologist and specialists. At 3 years old, I was strapping him into the special needs school bus and, just sending him out into the world. And then, fighting with the school districts to make sure that he had the services that he needed. There was that transition period in junior high that was horrible, getting calls from the school every single day. And then, of course, looking at graduation when the school bus stops coming, and also if he's supposed to go on to post-high. Now 22, post-high is over. He's 24 now. And he's worked so many years that he's actually qualified because he worked a part-time job at our local amusement park called Lagoon. It's like our little mini Disneyland. And he also works 3 days a week at McDonald's. And so I was on a call this morning with Social Security, and he actually has enough work credits for SSDI. And so this is fabulous news for him because he doesn't have that $2,000 requirement for Social Security, and I'll get to that too. But now I need to start thinking about what does life look like for Jackson and for me for the remainder of our time period together. And then also planning for him passing away. One of the pieces of his syndrome is congenital heart problems. And so we never know. It's a heart aneurysm, an aortic aneurysm that could just happen at any time, even though we monitor it. And so that's always in the back of my mind. And then also my husband's health with cancer. So there's all this planning that has to go into our lives as caregivers for those with disabilities. I want to show you a different model. This is, again, a traditional planning program that a lot of families put into play. So there's asset protection, making sure you're having your emergency fund. If any of you have ever done, I just lost the name of it. It's the planning program where you have your cash in the envelopes and you have, your $1,000 emergency fund. There's those types of planning. And then as you grow in your career and you gain more assets, you start to accumulate wealth, and then you plan for retirement. And if you're really lucky and privileged, then you possibly get to do some legacy planning as far as leaving wealth to your loved ones. But for a family like mine, it's going to be a little bit different. And so I have to look at this total life care planning. I have to think about proper gifting and inheritance management. And I have to think about a lifetime of support for Jackson, managing his trust. Where is he going to live? How are we going to pay for the programs he needs? What about Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare? How can I leverage that together? And also that I have cash reserves and that Jackson has cash reserves. And then also looking at that holistic planning piece of my family. What about our mission statement? Do I have guardianship or an alternative to guardianship in place? Have I written my letter of intent? Have I looked at the special needs legal planning that's required? And so there's a lot of different pieces, and that's why it's so important to work with a planner that can help you navigate what life looks like for a family like mine. There's things that you need to take into consideration when you're doing your planning. So there's the child with a disability, and some families have more than one. And then we also have the children without disabilities. And so when I do my planning, I need to think about what will Jackson need, but also what will the other children need? How can I make that equitable? In life, you remember that picture of people looking over the fence and they're standing on the box, and some people don't need a box to stand on to see the baseball game, and other people need a little box, and other people need a bigger box. Nothing in life is fair, but how can I make it equitable for my kids? And how can I make sure everybody's needs are met? Of course, Jackson's going to have a higher level of need, but I also want to remember my other kids. And also thinking about my retirement and what do I want that to look like. So when I work with families, I try to take them through this 9-step process. And we're just going to go quickly through some of these steps tonight. to have you get a feel for what's involved with planning. So the first thing is to address your primary issues. Let's assess, let's do an evaluation, and see what you already have in place. Some people are stressed and think they don't really have a lot done, and really they're nailing it, and they've got all of the really key pieces in place, and they just need a few extra things. Other people are just starting out and they really do need a lot of help. So we'll look at those issues for you and see where you are in your planning. Here's some things to think about. My child may need some assistance, and I'm not sure yet of what that looks like. So when Jackson was like 3 or 4 years old, people would always ask me, what is the future going to look like for him? And I honestly didn't know. He was the first one and that was being diagnosed in our state. I didn't know how that was going to materialize for him as far as services. And then I was the one actually putting together the chromosome education material for the world. So how was I supposed to know what the future would look like when the genome had just barely been mapped? And so there were a lot of unknowns, and some of you might feel like that too. Like, we want to have high expectations for our kids. We want to, think that they're going to be able to do all these things, and we don't want to squash those dreams. So keep those dreams and let's figure out a way to make that happen, but we need to plan for it. My child will definitely need assistance. Maybe you already know, based upon the disability, what life is going to look like. And in some ways, that's easier to do the planning because you know what it's going to look like. Maybe you're stressed with getting turned down for benefits. For instance, a lot of people get rejected by SSI the first time they apply, and they think that when they get that rejection letter, they don't realize it's actually rejecting them from SSDI. They check for those work credits first, and then they'll later get the approval letter for SSI. But often, a lot of times when people apply for SSI, they even get rejected the first time. And so appeal, appeal, appeal. If you think you qualify and you meet the eligibility requirements, it's important that we work with you on that. And so I won't read all of those, but you can see there that a lot of people have different concerns about their primary issues. The second issue, or the second stage of planning, is our family mission statement. So identifying this is why it's one of the first steps, is you need to know what is important to you as a caregiver. I'll give you an example. This is Brady and 2 of his boys on a camping trip. And this is one of the mission statements. We respect the beliefs of each family member. We work together to help every member of the family reach their goals. So if that's really important to you and you want to structure out how you're going to do that by helping each family member, you can incorporate your family's goals and your vision into your plan, and then we'll set aside funding to help you achieve those goals. So that will make more sense as we go through this. The next step is a letter of intent. Now, a letter of intent, some people just kind of mentally check it off, like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. As long as I get a will done or a special needs trust, then I'm set, right? Well, the letter of intent is really important. You have to think of it as kind of like a guidebook or a Bible, if you will, for your child with a disability. If you went out on date night tomorrow night and you didn't make it home and you passed away, who would be the caregiver and what are they supposed to do? Who's the teacher? Where are the medications? Who are the physicians? Who are the specialists, especially if you have a medically complex child? I worked with one family and they were saying, gosh, it's hard for me to even leave to go out of town because it's just so complicated. And so when you have this letter of intent built for your estate plan, you really can use it in different areas of life. You can share pieces of it, cut and paste with your educator, with your therapist, with the babysitter, whoever it is, but it's the guidebook on your child. I sure wish I received that when Jackson was born by emergency C-section. This is your guidebook. 2 days out of the hospital post C-section, we're going to meet with the first specialist. This is what it's going to look like. And you have the benefit of being the expert on your loved one, and you can therefore provide that information to the people that are going to be caring for them. So we'll go through just a few things of what that means with the letter of intent, but it should encompass the plan for your child's future. So you might just think, well, I want them to live a happy life and do the things that they want to do. But when you think about the letter of intent, you have to be specific. So what do you want to consider? What does independence look like for Jackson? What about financial well-being? Part of Jackson's autism is that he doesn't like to be told what to do. So if he had somebody coming in and trying to micromanage his little McDonald's paycheck, that's going to cause some anxiety and some behavior issues for that new caregiver. So how can I explain to them what Jackson's financial situation is, how he manages his money, or maybe your child isn't able to work because of their disability, maybe there's not money there. Well, what are you going to put into place so that that loved one can have financial well-being? What funding do you already have secured? What funding do you still want to secure? Just explain the whole picture. And you don't need to be embarrassed if you haven't done anything or you can't afford to do anything. Just state it so that they know what the next step is. Just say, I haven't navigated Social Security yet. It's on my list. And then they would know, okay, I've got to do Social Security right away. Not only for Jackson, but for now that Jennie's passed away, his survivorship or the survivor benefits that he would get. What does quality of life look like for Jackson? What about employment? Does he want to work at the grocery store and stock shelves, or would he really love to work in, a place where there's animals? Or I have one girl that I work with, and she loves paper. She has Down syndrome. She loves paper. She loves stickers. And so she would love to work in a store that had paper and stickers. Like, how specific is that? And how awesome is it that that family could recommend employment for her based upon her likes? So, and of course, education and housing needs. And I could list examples for all of these, but here are just 10 basic points to include. And when you work with CaringTide, what I do is I give you a template for your letter of intent, because this is a lot of information. And as you sit down to write it, you get overwhelmed. And so that's why my template is so helpful, so that you can just go through and fill it in and delete what doesn't apply and add information for the things that do apply. But you want your family history, include like where you met your partner. What about how you were raised, what your parents were like. Maybe your child won't remember because they're so young when you pass away. Or maybe the people caring for them are distant cousins and they don't have all of your history. Include your medical history. Maybe there's things like that that will be needed down the road. So education, employment. We also want to talk about that housing piece, what residential looks like. What about social environment? Where does Jackson meet people? How does he like to spend his time? He utilizes this tool online called Discord, and it's his chat with people with gaming, and he loves it. Those are his people and those are his friends, where in real life it's harder for him to make friends. What about a religious environment? Is there a preference there? Community is huge when there's religion, and so maybe that's one area where Jackson doesn't have a lot of social outlets, and I would want to make sure that that's a priority. Or maybe his medical care. People might not know of the heart problem, so I want to make sure and outline that. And also behavior. Jackson always gets the blue plate. Jackson always eats first. And of course, we can be a hard nose and say, no, he's not going to, but then they're going to have the behavior that comes with it because he doesn't get the blue plate. So put all of these pieces into that letter of intent. You have to realize, though, it's not legally binding, but it is helpful. And there's been cases where the courts have looked at the letter of intent and considered it when an estate's going through probate and what the parents' wishes are. It's also tremendously helpful. And it also just helps to create this team. It's good to share this information beforehand, before you pass away, so that people aren't just getting this for the first time and seeing it for the first time upon your death. Okay, so a care notebook. This is an important tool that you can put together for you. I'm sure a lot of parents either have a digital or hard copy binder where they've put like the IEP, the latest IEP, or the latest lab results. But a care notebook can be not only for a caregiver, but also for Jackson. He can start to build, as he transitions to adulthood, his own care notebook, so that he can put in his lab results, the name of his doctor, the medication he's on, the dose, his last neuropsych eval, whatever it is that Jackson's going to need to learn to start to care for him. And I can still support him in this effort, but the point is to teach the skill so that he can start to do that himself. And there's a lot of free guides online of how to put a care notebook together, and I can help you with that as well. Okay, the next step, identify your financial resources. So I'm going to jump to this slide. On the left side is the public funding options, and not everybody qualifies for them. To be honest, it's been really hard because Jackson has a foot in both worlds, a foot in the neurotypical world and the foot in the disability world. And so he often hasn't qualified for a lot of programming or funding or waivers. And so that's why we're so excited about SSDI, is because he's now has those work credits, so he finally qualifies for something. And it's very helpful to try to help him build his life. But when you qualify for things like Social Security, Medicaid, or Medicare, the things on the left side are what that helps to fund. On the right side are the private sources of funding. So that would be like an ABLE account, a supplemental needs trust, which we'll talk about, the family support, what we're offering to him. Maybe he gets money for gifts. You know, there's things that you'll want to build into your planning. For instance, sounds like a first world problem, but with Jackson's disability, he loves technology. And if he didn't have a new computer or phone every few years and his technology broke, it would be really challenging for a caregiver to have him feel fulfilled. And so we would want to budget technology into his plan. Well, that's not something necessarily that could always be paid for by that left side. So on the right side, how am I going to fund that? If I wasn't here, I would want Jackson to have continuity. So we try to, save our money and do a little beach trip every year. And so how can I make sure Jackson still has that beach trip every year? I need to build that into the funding. Okay, so let's talk about Social Security. If you have Social Security, then you can only have $2,000 in your name in assets. It's called means tested. And so you need to make sure that there's not assets in their name, and you need to figure out ways to diversify that funding so that Jackson doesn't keep all of that. So I'll give you an example. He worked at the amusement park and he worked at McDonald's. And over the course of almost 10 years, he compiled this little nest egg of like $23,000. So if I were to apply for Social Security, because he just uses it, to pay for McDonald's and his Slurpees, and if he wants a new Star Wars t-shirt, if I were to apply for Social Security, even though he was eligible, I would get denied. He would get denied because he has more than $2,000 in his name. And so there's other ways that I can utilize that money. I can put it in an ABLE account, which we'll talk about later, because I can put at least $18,000 in an ABLE account every year, plus some that if he works. And there's other ways that you can move money so that it doesn't go in his name. Now, Social Security does generally have a look back period where they're looking at the funding. But for people who are not working, this isn't as critical of an issue, and it's easier for you to apply. If you have a child that's less than 18, it is based upon your income typically. And so really the magic number is 18. When Jackson turned 18, he qualifies by himself as an adult, and it's easier for me to get that Social Security. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is the calendar, meaning if you look ahead and you're looking at your own retirement, you can retire. Typically, you'd want to work with a financial planner, which we have some on our staff. There's like age 62, age 65, age 67 or 70. And depending upon when you retire, then you receive a certain amount of Social Security for you. But then that can also shift your child off of Social Security SSI to SSDI. And there's a lot of different formulas you could look at as far as how much you're going to receive, what is most advantageous for you, what makes the most sense, and what will be your child's amount versus what will be your amount. So I could do a whole class on Social Security. I'm just giving you the basics. But there's a lot of things to consider. I don't want it to be overwhelming. Just know there's social SSI, SSDI if your child's been working, or if you're already retired. There's a lot of options for you. Just a crash course in Medicaid. So the first thing I want you to think about is Medicaid is like a house, and there's a lot of ways to get in. And it depends how you get in with what services you're going to receive. And so the first thing is Medicaid is not Medicare. Medicare is typically for older individuals. However, Jackson is going to qualify for Medicare because he has those work credits. So even though he's 24, he won't ever be on Medicaid. He's going to go on to Medicare. So just don't lock it in your mind that it's one way or another. It just depends upon the program that you're accessing. Now, there are two distinct programs I want to talk about with Medicaid. The first, when I ask people and I'm doing the inventory assessment with families, I'll say, do you have access to Medicaid? And they think, oh, it's their health care. Yes. And they don't even understand that there's a thing called a Medicaid waiver. It's called HCBS, Home and Community-Based Waivers. Every state has a different waiver program. All the states get to run their own programs. So the programs we have in Utah are different than the programs in Alabama or Michigan, but we help families navigate those programs, because the lucky thing about my job is the disability system is set up very similarly in each state, and so I help you navigate it. A lot of families don't know where to start. But an HCBS waiver is something that allows you, if you qualify, services that can help support Jackson in his vision for adulthood. And so that could look like respite care. That could look like caregiver compensation, where I get paid to care for my son, depending upon if your state has that. And I have resources I can share with you that connect you with different funding sources for your state. And there's also grant opportunities. I have some brand new resources for you for grants, where you can fund things like a new wheelchair, or you want to do horseback riding lessons. And all this stuff is so expensive when you're paying for medication every single month and that's all you have in your budget. Sure, horseback riding or music therapy would be awesome, but not everybody can afford that. So we try to help you find ways that you can figure out how to pay for the things that would make your life better. One other thing I'll say about waivers really quick is a lot of states, if you're in California or Colorado or possibly New York, it's easier to access waivers. But in Utah, Jackson's been on a waiver wait list for over a decade. And because our state is so conservative, the legislature will not allocate enough money to get everybody off of the wait list. And so we sit here and we wait and we wait and we wait. And so people think, well, why should I get on the wait list for a waiver if I can't get off the wait list? Well, Jackson's qualified for 3 different pools of one-time funding. And so we've, over the course of over a decade, we've received about $30,000 in funding because we're sitting on this wait list. So if I work with you, I'd really want to dig into your waiver system and figure out the loopholes, figure out if that's beneficial for you. There's different types of waivers. Some states have like a disability waiver. Some people have an autism waiver. Some people have a medically complex waiver. So let's look at your waivers to make sure you're tapping into the things you need. And then as we go back to our planning wheel, you're going to take the Social Security, your money, ABLE accounts, all the different pieces, and really dovetail those together for step 4 to figure out what your funding looks like. Then step 5 is determine a life care plan cost. So what are going to be your expenses to get to retirement? What is it going to look like once I retire to get Jackson to the end of his life? What about all of the other expenses that come with that? So it's the total life care package. It's not just how am I going to pay for a house for Jackson? It's more than that. The next piece is we all have to look at what programming costs. And so this is going to kind of be a wake-up call for some people, and other people they already get this. But if I don't have a waiver, if I don't have somebody that's going to help me with supported living or a host home or transportation to a day program, I have to figure all of that out if Jackson doesn't qualify. So out of all those things on the screen, by far, the biggest expense is going to be housing. And a lot of families don't know how to figure this piece out. And so we really try to break it down for them and help them make a plan of how we're going to do this. For instance, if I had a vision for me to buy a duplex and Jackson lives in one side, and I use his funding to try to help pay for the mortgage, and then we rent out the other side, that to me would be a great fit for where he's at cognitively in the community. It would be a great fit, but I have to figure out how to pay for a duplex. So how am I going to do that? I'll give you another example. In Salt Lake City, it's a fabulous, beautiful, safe community. However, transportation is not the best. There is transportation that runs north and south along the Wasatch Mountains, which is our main mountain range here, but there's not great transportation running east and west. And so if I want him to have any access to community, I need to have him be in downtown Salt Lake or in another hub like that that has transportation with the metro since he doesn't drive. So the average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the Salt Lake area is $1,400. And if he were on SSI, the most he could receive is $943. So obviously there's a gap there. And that's only 148% of what the rent is costing. So I need to figure out a way to supplement that with some other planning pieces. Here's another diagram for you. This is the amount of caregivers caring for their loved ones. A lot of individuals with disabilities stay with their caregiver for the remainder of their life, which can be a beautiful thing. But it's also hard because at some point, I will probably pass away before Jackson or my husband will. So what are we going to do to supplement that? And that can be really hard. But what we try to do is teach families to use a blend of funding sources in order to pay for housing, the day program, transportation, all of that. So insurance is one way. We can use insurance tools. We can also use private assets, which is all the funding that we're setting aside, and also Jackson's money. Then also the public benefits, which is things like Social Security and Medicaid and SSDI. And then also natural supports. For instance, if I am stuck in a meeting and I can't pick Jackson up for work, there's 2 neighbors that I can call, and those are natural supports. His siblings are natural supports. Grandma and grandpa, even though they're older, can be a natural support. His church community can be a natural support. He has one friend who kind of adopted him from high school, and she just threw him a surprise birthday party, and that's his social outlet, and she's a natural support. So how can I use all of these different tools to help build my strategy for the future? We've talked a little bit about this, but also my retirement. I really don't want to work until I'm 75, 80 years old. I really want to be able to enjoy grandkids and all the vision I have for my own life. So how can I plan for my future, but also still continue to be a caregiver for Jackson? The other piece that we want to plan for is education. Some of you have younger children who are not in college yet, and so you're still saving, or maybe you're like me and you have a child in college. And so this is Utah State University. This is an average, and it's probably quite economical compared to other universities. But in order to go to a full year of school, it's $18,304 per year. And that was including room, board, fees, all the things. And it was very reasonable as far as how that was broken down when I gathered that number together. So $73,000 over 4 years. Now, if you're thinking, gosh, I have a senior in high school and I never started that 529 savings account, how am I going to fund that? There's strategies and tools that we could put into place to help you figure out how to do that for not only that child, but other children as well. What about long-term care services? So my mother-in-law was just in an accident. She's almost 80 years old. She was driving down the highway and had a stroke and rolled her car 9 times front over back, and was in the hospital for 2 months, had half of her skull removed, and she was just released yesterday. But there's long-term care services that are going to be in play there. There's Medicare that's going to care for part of it. But I think about that as myself. Okay, there's Medicare for part of it, but what do I want life to look like now that I need in-home care? Do I want to try to stay in my home? Do I need to go to an assisted living facility? And how am I going to pay for that? When you look at the cost of a skilled living facility, it's $107,000 per year. And that's on the light side. I would argue it's probably more. You can see my source down there at the bottom. But also, how do we care for our aging parents? I lost my mom in 2020, right when COVID was starting. She passed away from kidney failure, and then also my dad in 21 of a massive heart attack. But during that gap of them coming to the end of their life, there was a lot of responsibility placed upon the siblings to try to make sure we had the right support for them, and they lived a little further away. So how are we, when that falls to us, my parents didn't have a lot of life insurance, and so we had to help supplement and to cover funeral expenses. How are we going to care for our loved ones as well? So let's build that into your plan, especially when you don't know the cost. And then this is the absolute worst. What if we die prematurely? How are we leaving our family? And then also the quality of life, that beach vacation, Jackson's computer. What does that look like and what do we need to build in? So this is by far the biggest question I get. Well, how much is enough? How much do I need to retire and how much do I need to care for Jackson? So I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios. We won't have time to do all of them, but you will receive the slides and I will click through these so that you can make sure and see the slides. But let's just do one case or a couple of case studies. So Marty is 17 today and his parents are 54 and 53. They want him to have about $4,000 per month to live on from his age 25 to the end of his life. Now remember my rent that I put up on the screen of $1,400. And of course you could live in a rural area or you could live, in someone's basement apartment. But again, for Jackson, he's going to need at least, 3,000 to 4,000 a month to pay for food, utilities, all of his expenses. So it will take about $3 million from when dad dies at 85 to support Marty from his age 48 to the time Marty gets to 85. And so we're just assuming that's a 6% annual compound return on his assets. And you can see all of the specifics down at the bottom with the SSDI and how much the dad's receiving with Social Security. And again, I'm going to send you these slides. So how are we going to do that? Doesn't 3 million sound overwhelming? That sounds overwhelming, right? So here are some strategies. Some of these you're probably are a good fit for you and some of them might not be, but we'll break it down. So the easiest thing is to invest a lump sum today of the $620,000 you all have sitting in your bank account. And we're going to assume that you're going to earn interest on that. And so that might not be feasible. So we're also going to allocate estate planning assets remaining at the time of your death will go to a child's special needs trust, and you're going to fund it that way. You could also utilize life insurance, which I'll talk about in just a minute. You could open an ABLE account for your loved one. You could also think of some out-of-the-box strategies. Now, we're not advocating for credit card debt, but if you use credit cards wisely, you can use tools like rounding up and then depositing that extra amount. If you go to Walmart and you spend $19.50 on, diapers and formula, and then round up the 50 cents to a dedicated savings account. So check with your financial institutions, see what they have available for you from a savings strategy. There's also things like dedicated savings accounts. If you wanted to put so much money into an account and then promise not to use it, then you get a certain interest rate for that. You can save what you can each month. You can also use credit card rewards. For instance, you go to Costco at the end of the year, they give you a check, and then you can, instead of paying for the new Costco card that year, you use their check, and then you can save the rest. Did you know that if you save $20 each week for 1 year, you will save $1,040 a year? And that can be leveraged to buy the life insurance you need for a larger death benefit. Here's another case study. So this is a single parent with limited income. Sally Sample is 35 years old, single mom. She has a daughter, Lindsay, with disabilities, and she's going to require a lifetime of support. Sally has a stretched budget, and she's trying to manage it on her own. So we want to make sure that Lindsay qualifies for Social Security and Medicaid. You can try to apply and see if you can be eligible, even though your child is younger than 18 years old, depending upon income. Make sure that Lindsay never has more than $2,000 in her name. So again, we're going to want to use an ABLE account or other forms of planning to make sure that Lindsay doesn't have anything in her name that would disqualify her from Social Security and Medicaid. You would want to contact an estate planning attorney to draft a will with a contingent on it. So when you pass away, your will would dictate that things would go into a special needs trust for Lindsay. And then, of course, create the special needs trust. So I want to tell you quickly, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but as we look at these scenarios, in our community, the disability community, you hear the word special needs trust, and people think it's all the same thing. There's actually different kinds of special needs trusts. If Jackson were in an accident, let's say he had a medical incident and the hospital paid us, $5 million. That goes to Jackson, and that would be Jackson's money, and it would have to go into a first party special needs trust, a self-funded first party special needs trust. So that's Jackson's money. If I'm setting up a trust, what I would want to do is set up a third party supplemental needs trust. And that means it's a third party funding it. It's not Jackson. Jackson's taken out of the equation and the money would just go to him safely and it wouldn't jeopardize his Social Security and Medicaid. So that's what that means right there. And I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. You could purchase group term life insurance. So let's say you're working at Walmart and Walmart provides a group term life policy. You know, it's maybe $8 a month. And if you were to pass away, you would get $50,000 to $100,000. Always utilize your group term life. It's very inexpensive. The downside of that, though, is, you know, when you lose that job or you move on, then of course the insurance stops as well, unless they have an option for you to pay to continue that policy. But that's an easy, low-cost way for you to utilize life insurance. Whenever you have a beneficiary, make sure that it's the trust. So if that Walmart policy, if you were to pass away and they fund it and they give Lindsay the $50,000 that you have been paying on, the beneficiary should not be Lindsay. It should be your special needs trust. That's a huge mistake some families make, is that they leave things in their children's name. And you'll die. But one family I worked with, they said, oh, don't worry, we already have a special needs trust. My mom's the beneficiary, and if my mom dies, then it goes to my friend. I about died, because what's to say that something in that mom's life or that friend's life is going to not change, and they might be tempted to take that money and say, oh, I'll just pay the trust back later. And then Jackson never gets the money. And so you have to be prepared, even though we love our relatives, we love our friends, we have to make sure it's legally structured in a way that's safe for Jackson and it's safe for your loved one as well. And then these other two bullet points, I'll leave these up for you, but purchase either the term life insurance or a permanent insurance, and then make sure those retirement plans have the proper beneficiary. So here's some other things Sally could do is purchase that permanent life insurance, the death benefit with the ability to increase over time. There's different products where the coverage is designed to stay in force as long as the insured lives. The cash value that can grow over time, a cash value that can grow without taxation. There's so many strategies that we could utilize. Save or invest that $50 per month in an ABLE account, and you can see there how that's going to grow over time. And then again, the second calculation, if you invest $100 per month in the ABLE account, how that will grow. And you think, well, gosh, $46,000 is not enough to pay for the rest of Jackson's life. But you know what? You're $46,000 ahead of where you were. And so that's all this is the next right step, the next right step. Let's just keep doing it. Here's another example of a 2-income stream family. Bob and Susan are both 35 and have 3 children. One of their children, Shane, has disabilities and needs a lifetime of support. And Shane is also 10 years old. Together, they earn about $150,000 annually. So here's some strategies that Bob and Susan could utilize. Make sure that Shane is eligible for SSI and Medicaid at his age 18th birthday. You're going to purchase that group term life insurance on both parents through their employers. You want to make sure you have that will in place as like a bare minimum. And you can do that through some economical ways rather than attorney fees. But you want to make sure it's drafted appropriately. So have somebody help you with that if you're not an attorney. And also the revocable trust drafted if possible, if you have money to pay for that. Make sure that beneficiary designation is the trust and contribute to the ABLE account. And then here's one tool or tip that people don't know about. Purchase a permanent survivorship or a second to die insurance on both parents that will pay the trust. So what that means is I have this policy, and once I die, it goes to Ryan, but when Ryan, my husband, passes away, that's when it funds. And so sometimes that's a more economical way for people to purchase the insurance. Make sure that survivorship whole life policy is on both parents. It pays after the second parent dies. And the special needs trust, again, is the beneficiary, not the parent. Okay, I'll just show these really quick so you can see these when you get the slides at home, but there's a grandparent scenario for you. Okay, life insurance. We'll go through this quick too. Whenever you utilize life insurance, it must be coordinated with your overall estate plan and your trust. It's not like you just want to go buy some random policy. Let's be like very calculated about it. What is that vision? What is the plan? What other resources do you have? And now let's buy the piece of service that actually fits my plan. The ownership beneficiary designations are extremely important. Again, mine would go to my husband Ryan, and then it would go into our trust. The way our trust is set up is that it's a family trust, and then once we pass away, then it would fund Jackson's special needs trust, and the other kids would get their payouts. But I also have thresholds built into the trust so that, you know, they get the first little lump sum when they're 18, and then they'll get the next little lump sum when they're 25. I want to make sure their frontal cortex is fully developed, and then they'll get their full final payout at 30. But Jackson's will stay within the trust so that a trustee and an executor can manage that for him. And that's only one way to set up a trust. You would want to work with an attorney to make sure that it's set up the way that works for your family. Another way to set up a trust would be to have that third-party standalone supplemental needs trust. And what that means is Grandpa could sell his property when he passes, and then that money would go to Jackson. But if you don't set up your trust based upon the needs of your family, then there's a possibility you can't put money in it until Ryan and I die. So you want to really make sure what's coming in for Jackson, what other family members are going to help Jackson. Do I want to put money in the trust for Jackson now, or do I only want to do it when I pass away? There's different types of trusts, and we can go through those with you, but those are just two examples. And then here's another one. Your attorney must always know about your life insurance. We want to make sure your trust is naming all of the different policies so that everything's contained within the trust, and that the beneficiaries on the life insurance would be me, then Ryan, and then the trust. And then an insurance audit makes sense. You might think, oh, we already have all this set up, I don't need to worry about it. Well, as we go through and we do your life care plan, we might identify some gaps. There might be things that you want to pay for, but you don't have a way to pay for them. So let's figure out if there's some more funding that's needed. Here are just 4 refreshers on the different types of insurance we've talked about or that are available. That group term policy, that's the one through your employer. It's really cheap, and it's something to help you fund your plan. Term life, that's what I talked about that I had in college. When I came out of college, it was a temporary insurance. You can typically get those for a 10-year policy, a 15-term policy, 20, 30, and it's typically pretty inexpensive, and it's a fixed death benefit. So let's say I buy, you know, $100,000 15-year term policy. That's an option. The next option is a whole life policy, and that could be either whole or universal. And whole life is where it doesn't expire unless, of course, you stop paying the premiums on it. And in universal life, there's either like an indexed universal life or a variable universal life. Some of that's tied to the stock market or to the index market. And so I don't want to get anybody too confused tonight, but just know there's a lot of options, and we can look to see what's going to work for your plan and what's going to be the best fit for you. ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are an incredible tool. And as I work with families across the United States, I feel like there's this underlying current of nervousness about ABLE accounts, or people don't like them. Some people love them. So I just wanted to spend a minute and talk about ABLE accounts and the purpose of them. People needed a way to be able to save money when you have a disability, and especially if you're working, without jeopardizing that $2,000 threshold on Medicaid and Social Security. And so it's just a savings account, a tool. And there's, I believe, 48 different plans across the United States based upon your state's plan. I'm in Utah, but I'm part of Ohio's plan because I like the Ohio plan. It's a great quarterly fee that's pretty low. ABLE accounts are also, there's tax benefits for those. Here's some of the bullet points on ABLE accounts, so you guys can review those later. But I can put up to $18,000 per year into the ABLE account, and that changes every year. Last year it was 17 and change, and this year it's gone up to 18. But then I can also include an additional 14 and change, 14,580 if Jackson's working. So if you have a situation like that, there's potentially some great money that you can save there, but you need to be aware of some of the thresholds. For instance, if Jackson were to reach $100,000 in his ABLE account, then his Social Security and SSDI would be paused. It says terminated there, but I like paused better, because if he was to lower that down, then that could be restored. There's also some plan limits. So you see down at the bottom, ablenrc.org. That's the National Able account site. And you can go on there and compare and contrast all the different Able plans. And you can see, what those thresholds are, what the investment options are. But you just want to make sure that you're using it for things that are an approved expense. So Jackson Slurpees, his computer, his education. You would want to make sure that you're using it for things that are a qualified disability expense. You just want to be careful that you're utilizing the difference between Social Security and ABLE accounts accurately so that you don't reduce your Social Security payment. So I'll leave that slide up there so you can see that when you go back through these. And then also with the contributions, this is a great tool for other people to help leave Jackson money. If you were on Social Security and people are giving Jackson money, that could be an expense that could harm his Social Security. So this is a great tool for grandpa to leave birthday money or for somebody to leave his graduation money or just whatever money people wanted to give Jackson could go into this ABLE account. There are some key things to remember, and this is why I hear some people not liking ABLE accounts, is there is a Medicaid clawback or Medicaid payback provision. But one thing you should be aware of that, we're always learning in this community, some ABLE programs in their states are trying to limit that. And so I believe Alabama was one of those that's really trying to limit that so that Medicaid doesn't come back and take as much. So the payback is only from the date you opened or you started receiving Medicaid. So let's say I opened my ABLE account when I was 5 years old and I didn't start receiving Medicaid until I was, 25 years old. They're only going to do that clawback analysis, the payback analysis from the time you started receiving Medicaid. So it's not like they're going to come in and swoop out all the money. They also make sure that there's expenses paid and the funeral expenses, and then they'll come back and pay and take that clawback. But look at the programs because maybe you're part of a state where that's not as big of an issue as in other states. The other thing about this, the trust is that first party special needs trust where Jackson got the money from the hospital. There's also a Medicaid payback option with that, not option, a Medicaid payback clawback revision or provision for a first party. If it was a third party where it's my money, then that's why that's so important to have the trust is because there's not the Medicaid payback with the third party. So lots to understand, but the thing that I want you to remember about ABLE accounts is one is not better than the other. The important piece is that we dovetail these things together and utilize the positive aspects of all of these planning tools to help your loved one have the life that they want. Because the downsides with the trust, even though we have to have the trust in order to protect our kids' money, is when we fund it, then there's going to be some taxes there and it's management and the trustee and the executor. With the ABLE account, it's a little bit easier because Jackson can have access his money really easily with what's called a stable card for our plan. It's just like a debit card where he's using it to pay for things. But there is the Medicaid payback option. So I want to be really thoughtful and considerate as a caregiver how much I'm putting in a trust, when I fund the trust, how I'm using the ABLE account, and how much I'm putting in the ABLE account so that I can really maximize my planning for Jackson. Okay, and then as we get into this life care planning, this is the wills, the trust, the guardians, and the special needs trust. So we've talked a lot about this. Whenever you set up a trust, you want to make sure you're working with an elder law attorney or an estate planning attorney. A lot of us have great, brother-in-laws out there who are an attorney. But if they're not familiar with how to set up a trust for a family like mine, they could miss some things. And they could also maybe set up the wrong trust. Like I said, what if grandpa wants to leave him money now? Then the trust needs to be set up to accept money now rather than a trust that's going to fund later upon my death. So make sure you work with someone when you're that's qualified. When you work with us, we are able to help you vet your attorney and make sure it's an attorney that is qualified to do the work that you need them to do. This is another little blurb about that. Just make sure that they're specialized in special needs trusts. Okay, and then that implementation piece. It's really important to agree upon the strategies that you're using. Get on the same page with your family, make sure that you're talking about it. The worst type of planning that can take place is something that's in a silo, that you're not involving the people that are going to be Jackson's caregivers. So make sure everybody has the information. Share with them that letter of intent, have a key meeting where you're rolling it out and say, this is what I would like to have happen. These are tender thoughts and this is emotional to figure this piece out. And it's a lot of mental work to get it done. But when you finish it, you'll have that sleep well at night promise where you can really feel good about the plan you put in place. And then again, we need to remember to revisit that plan. This is one thing I wanted to share. This is like a letter that you could put together for your friends and family and just say, we've recently completed this planning. You'll see Jackson there in his Star Wars shirt. But we just want to spell it out for people because people have great intentions, but if they're leaving all that money to Jackson, it's really detrimental to Jackson's plan if that money gets left in his name. So be open and honest with grandparents and relatives and friends to make sure that their good intentions are not actually crushing the plan that you've put in place. And then just do that annual review. Again, relationships change, marital status changes, jobs change. Our finances are going up and down, the market changes. So let's review that either annually or at least every 3 years to make sure that that the planning's being reviewed. And like I said, the market changes, tax law changes. Some people are not even aware of the tax benefit of modifying their home. Or if your doctor says you need to get this wheelchair, how there might be a tax benefit there. Or if they have to go to a private school because the school district can't provide what they need, there might be some tax benefit there. Maybe if I went to a conference in DC for Jackson syndrome, part of that conference could be tax deductible. So it's important that you work with people who understand this and people, like who I work with every day that can help you piece these things together, pull on all the threads and really figure out how to make a plan that works within your budget. The hardcore truth is that we all have an expiration date on our mortality. We have 3 choices on how to handle that reality. We can deny it, we can ignore it, or we can plan for it. And that's what's key, is that we really plan for it. So that's what we try to do with our partner family program. We meet you where you are, we figure out what your needs are and assess what can be done, and then we help you identify a strategy and help you find your next right step. So if you have a specific scenario, I'd love to answer your questions and we could walk through some of them. I would love to give you like 20 more minutes, an hour longer on just trusts alone or taxes or Social Security, but I tried to just give you enough to get you started. But if you want to either use that QR code or that link, we'd be happy to do a free consultation for you. And we have time, if you guys want to stick around, we can run through some questions too. Let's
Yes,
see.
that'd be wonderful. We actually have some questions in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Okay, a class on Social Security only. Yes, we can do that, Mona, if we want to set that up. We'd be happy to help you, or if you guys already have a class, Mona, that's great too.
Awesome. I would love to set that up.
Okay. Would you recommend to set up a trust and will with an attorney from your home state, or is this a service that you offer? Great question. Okay, so the way that our partner family program works is I'm there to guide you. And so we do that full assessment. And if you decide to join our program, then we do an onboarding session that's about an hour and a half. And I go through everything. We look at your IEP, we look at your financial plan, we look at, your 401k, all of the different pieces, and then we get to work. And each month I'm just working on helping you find your next right step. With your attorney, we do recommend working with somebody in your home state, but as part of our program, I go with you to your appointment. A lot of times families don't know what to ask, and they're just trusting the attorney. And don't get me wrong, I love attorneys. They're specialized and they do a great job. But it's kind of like if you remember your very first IEP meeting, I was just there and I was just, yeah, tell me all the things. This is great. Okay, Jackson gets 20 minutes once a week of speech. And by the time I'm done, I'm like, no, the data in his IEP shows that he should get this many services. And it's kind of one of those things. It's like when you know better, you do better. And so we found it's really beneficial, if you want me to go with you to that first consultation with the attorney, really map out what it is you need, what are the questions you should ask. But it is great to work with somebody in your home state because they're familiar with the laws in your state. I do have other options for you that are more of like a software program, but it really depends upon your situation. If you have a complex estate, let's say you've been divorced and there's her kids and his kids, and you've owned a business and you've sold a business, then it's probably more likely that an attorney would be better than software. So we could walk through all those options for you and help you decide what's going to be the best fit for your budget and for your estate. Great question.
Okay, awesome. And we have another question coming in. What is the cost for your services? I understand that could vary.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's based upon your situation and what you need. So it really just depends. Some people, like I said, have a lot of planning that needs to take place, and they, really need to put a lot of financial services in place because they don't have any insurance. And some people just want to review and say, hey, just look at my IEP, look at my trust. What am I missing? Where's the gap? So it really just depends. But our goal is to give every family in America this planning. And so we really try to make it fit what will work for you. And then somebody said, should somebody with a 401k opportunity still fund it, or does it jeopardize the 2,000 limit for Social Security? So I need a little bit more information. Jack, do you mean, do you have a disability? Is this your 401k, or is it your 401k and you have a child? You can
This
unmute
is no, this is for my daughter, and she was working at a job that she was able to contribute to a 401k. And if that 401k becomes greater than $2,000, does that jeopardize her $2,000 asset limit?
Yeah, great question. So I believe that it would. And so we would want to connect you with our financial services team, and they could help you verify. But if it's an asset in her name, yes, you would want to make sure that it's not an asset in her name.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that you could utilize is that ABLE account, because there are some tax strategies there. For instance, like the Massachusetts ABLE account, people really like their investment strategy. I really like Ohio because of the low fees. But there are some tax advantages there. You'd also want to weigh out if there's a match program going on with her 401k. And also, if she's working, then maybe she qualifies for SSDI once she has enough work credits, because Jackson started working in 2017. It's 2024, and he's only worked part-time, and he already has enough work credits. So that means test of 2,000 is no longer an issue for him. So then, I mean, gosh, it opens up so many more possibilities when she's lucky enough to be able to work like that. I don't know, is she working super part-time, or what's her situation?
She is part-time, and she was contributing to a 401k, and the 401k was amassing pretty quickly due to the company match.
Mhm.
And so we're now struggling with trying to somehow get all of her accumulated money out of her name.
Yeah.
And we're trying to be creative about that and legal at the same time, obviously.
Exactly. So I would want to connect you directly with Brady. He's our, again, 22-year certified financial planner, and he could help you figure out that for sure. But, any asset, as far as I know, is going to be something that's means tested for her. That's what I was doing as well with Jackson's little $23,000 Slurpee money pool. How do I make this work, be legal, and strategy?
And can I ask one other question regarding the special needs trust?
Yes.
And this might sound a little complicated, but we did hire an attorney to create a special needs trust. We had already done financial planning when our daughter was an infant, and we weren't aware that we were going to have a special needs daughter at that point. And so when we redid our financial planning, the our attorney created a special needs trust, but it seemed to be more of a line item in our own revocable family trust. And somehow we were told that we had to fund it, we had to create an account, we could name it whatever we wanted. It just didn't seem as clear cut as I thought it should be. And I guess I'm kind of curious, when people talk about special needs trusts, are they actually identified as special needs trusts, or is that just a term we use to talk about different accounts that are, say, within a family trust?
Yeah, great question. So that's exactly what I was talking about with the way that the trust is set up. So what we would want to do is, how old's your daughter now? It's the daughter that is working,
Yeah, she's 22.
and you haven't revisited your trust since then, right?
Oh no, we just did it this year.
Oh, just this year. And did he set it up as just the line item?
It was just a paragraph within our own family trust.
Okay. Yes.
It was basically about, in the event of our death, I don't there was just, like I said, it was just a paragraph, and so then we had to take that to our financial planners, and they had to open up a new account, and everybody had to talk to each other, and I'm just not so sure that we did it the right way. It just doesn't sound like it worked out. But
Yeah.
I think we're all set, but I still don't feel as though we have a special needs trust. It just seemed like it was a line item. We opened up another account, we're funding it. It's not in her name. It's under my wife and I's name. So it just doesn't, I'm just wondering if that sounds kind of the way it's supposed to be handled.
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple of ways to do it, and that's one of them, but it depends upon how you're going to utilize the trust. And that's why you need to make it clear with the attorney what the goals are. So if you want to fund the trust now and have money within the trust, then that's where you need the standalone third-party special needs trust. So if you have a family trust, a revocable family trust with a special needs provision, the way that that typically works, and again, I would have to look at your trust to make sure that I'm telling you 100%. So the information I'm sharing with you right now is based upon general information for all the people listening. We'd have to look specifically at your trust to see what was set up. But if it was a revocable family trust with a special needs provision, how that typically works is that special needs trust sits empty until Ryan and I pass away. And then our life insurance would go into the trust, and Jackson's portion would go into his third-party special needs trust. And that's when that's actually like funded and active, and there would be a trustee and there would be an executor managing it. Some people already have money that they want to put in. For instance, that family that I told you about where grandpa has property in Hawaii, he wants to sell the property and leave it to his grandson. They need to set up that standalone third-party special needs trust now so that they can put money in the trust now. The current trust that the parents have is just a provision where it will get created once they pass away and their life insurance funds it. So you kind of have to decide if there's funding that needs to go in it before you die, or if you just want to have everything execute upon your death. So there's a couple of different ways to do it. And there's, ways you can factor in life insurance. There's ways you can strategize your tax minimization. Because if you have a lot of money sitting in the third party standalone special needs trust, there's going to be some management there, management fees and taxes. So there's strategy behind it. I would work if you already have an attorney in place, if you already have a financial planning team in place, I would work with them and have that conversation. Also talk with your family and see what's the possibility of needing to fund that now. It sounds like they did set up an account, so.
They did set up an account because, well, and I don't want to get all into it, but we of course had saved for her college, and she was unable to ever go to college. So we have, in essence, enough to fund college. So now we're taking that money out to try to I guess funnel it into the special needs trust, because we kind of view that as her money. So that's the short of it.
There's another option too that might be beneficial for tax savings. So again, talk to your financial team, or you can ask for a consultation with us. But I have another client where he has 2 children. He funded the 529 for the college account. The oldest daughter is not going to use all the money because of scholarship and grandparent money. So they really want to move that money into their special needs, their daughter with special needs, so that she can access it for training programs and her needs. And so we could look at a possibility, depending upon how it was set up, if it can be moved into an ABLE account. But then you'd want to weigh how much is in the account. Is there going to be Medicaid payback? Is she getting Medicaid? You know, so there's strategy. Everything is strategy, and everybody's situation is individualized, but that could be an option too.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Great questions. Okay, any other questions? Okay, perfect. Well,
I was just gonna say, I was gonna send something in the chat. Yeah, I actually have a question. I was at a conference and I took the session of the Special Needs Alliance session, and they were saying something about, and I just want to clarify it. If your child has a disability, to be careful not to establish too many work credits, because if they do, then they will no longer qualify for Social Security. Can you clarify that one a little bit, if you know anything about
yeah,
it?
so I'll just use my situation as an
Sure.
example. So Jackson has accumulated all of these work credits. So when I go to apply for Social Security, they're going to look, and this is the case with anybody. When you go to apply for Social Security, they're going to look to see if work credits are in place, either for the child with a disability or if there's a parent that's already retired and claiming Social Security. If there is work credits, they're going to get SSDI instead of SSI. And if my husband were already retired, then Jackson would get, you know, the SSDI based upon my husband's retirement. Eventually, most people will move off of Social Security into SSDI because then they're working off of their parents' work credits, their retirement. But for the major part of this disability world, a lot of people are just on SSI. Okay, so once you apply, they look to see if you have those work credits. If they don't have a work credits, you're going to get a denial letter. And people freak out because they think, oh, I'm getting denied for Social Security, but really they're just saying you're denied for SSDI. Then they move on to look to see if you're eligible for SSI. They look at the parent's income if they're under 18, and if they're over 18, then they'll look at the child's income and assets. And they want to make sure that there's not more than $2,000 in their name, and then they would get approved for SSI. So for Jackson's scenario, there's no downside for him because he has the work credits, he's on SSDI, he'll get Medicaid instead of, or sorry, he'll get Medicare instead of Medicaid, and there's not the $2,000 limit. So it's great. So the only limit for him will be he cannot earn at his job more than what they told me was $1,500 a month. So
Awesome.
I don't
Yeah.
see a downside for Jackson, but again, the disability world is so individualized. You would want to look at your situation and what makes the most sense, especially when you go to retire. What age? I was looking at my Social Security statement just as like let's see what I would get when I'm ready to retire. And it showed me exactly what I would get at 62, 65, 67, and 70. So there's definitely benefits. There's also strategies. Depending upon how much your child is going to get versus how much you're going to get, if it's worth it for you to keep working. A lot of different things to factor in. And that's why you don't want to just wing it. You really do want to work with planners who understand the nuances to the program. And there was one other question that I think is along that lines. How does the parent retirement affect the child with the disabilities SSI? My daughter gets the maximum right now. Will that change when I retire? So I think it will depend upon those work credits, what you're going to pull, what age you're going to retire. If there's the work credits there to move her over to SSDI. I've heard some different not analogies, but case studies where it was better once they went over to SSDI because there was a little bit more funding. So it'll just depend. It's not something where you'll just be like, oh, let's retire at 65. Let's be really thoughtful about it and let's help you do some research on your specific situation. There was one other question. I don't know, do you guys have 5 more minutes to talk about guardianship?
Absolutely. Is everybody okay with that in the
You guys,
chat room?
you guys can drop if that doesn't apply to you, but I just know Candace had a question earlier in the night that I covered about guardianship. And there's every guardianship laws in every state or the way it's structured is different. So for instance, in California, you're going to get conservatorship. In Utah, you're going to get guardianship. And so we would want to look at your state and where you reside to see what's the best fit for you. Right now, there's a big push in the disability community to not get guardianship. I'm not a pro or con either way. What I encourage parents to do is to look at their specific situation and say, what is best for my child, not what the disability community says. Because there's children that need, or loved ones, I shouldn't say children, because you could have a 25-year-old like me or 24-year-old, but they're my loved one. And I need to do what's best for Jackson. So as I look at guardianship or conservatorship or whatever it is in your state, you want to say, how can I keep them safe? Can Jackson sign a lease by himself? Could he go get a job by himself? Can he manage his finances by himself? If he were in a car accident, could he tell the paramedics everything they needed to know? Could he manage his medication? Could he make life-saving choices by himself? The answer to all of those questions are no. So even though his autism superpower is politics and he could tell me every single thing about every single law, he can't do all of these things that he needs to do to manage his life as an adult. Can he do a lot of things? Yes, he's awesome. So do I want to look at full guardianship or do I want to look at limited guardianship? Full is in all areas. So that's like healthcare, finances, education, where I live. But then you also retain certain rights like voting. So we'd look at the guardianship laws in your state to see what's retained. Like getting married, voting, dating, being able to be able to intake substances. There's different laws that are parameters. Or do I want to just do limited guardianship and only get guardianship in like education or medical or financial? Or there's alternatives to guardianship. In some states, supported decision-making is a legal opportunity. Do you remember that pie chart where it said natural supports? Supported decision-making is where you identify who your support network is, and then you use that as a tool to make decisions in your life, and it's a legal alternative. In Utah, that is not a legal alternative, but it's a tool I can use with guardianship. Or if Jackson had more capability to make choices by himself that were safe, then I could do power of attorney, and I could do power of attorney in medical or financial or education or whatever it is, or all of the different areas. And there's 2 different types of power of attorney. You could do a durable power of attorney where it's just in effect from the day it's signed, or you could do a springing power of attorney where it springs into effect when a certain instance happens. For instance, if Jackson were incapacitated in the hospital, it would spring into effect because that was outlined in the power of attorney. There are some cons to power of attorneys, and people want to just say, I'm not doing guardianship, I'm going to do power of attorney, when really it's a loved one that is very incapacitated and they need that support. The thing that they don't understand about power of attorney is a new power of attorney would go into effect. So if your child can be manipulated and somebody was able to have them sign a new power of attorney, or a bank wanted to contest it, that a power of attorney wasn't valid, there could be some problems. You could definitely work through them, but it's not like end all be all safest. If your child has a very high level of need, then guardianship might be the best way to go. However, I have one family that I work with, their daughter has Down syndrome and she's very high functioning. She drives, she makes choices, she goes to community college. And so guardianship is not, did I say that right at the beginning of the scenario? They do not have guardianship. They only have power of attorney. And that's a great fit for her. So it's very individualized. Look at the needs of your child. Can they do these basic things that will help them secure like a bank account, finances, or can they do that with support? We'd really want to go through the options, and I could educate you about all the different options that are available for your state and what would be the best fit. So that was a long answer, but there's your guardianship tutorial.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah,
Awesome. Go ahead,
Okay.
Candace. I'll say that's awesome. Back on the SSDI, is there a age range or like a number of work credits for them to qualify for the SSDI?
Yeah, I believe it's 4 quarters of work credits.
And is there an age range?
It would be the work credits. So I mean,
Okay.
well, it's going to be they're going to be a little older before they acquire all of the work credits.
Okay.
But Social Security is stepping up their game, and they have some great resources on their site. It's ssa.gov. And so there's even options. You know, I was working with one family in Alabama, and it's a cute grandparents that have custody of their grandchild. And we were able to find some extra funding for them through something called a kinship grant that's through their state's Social Security. So there's probably some things in your state that you're not aware of, and I would love to do a deep dive on Michigan with some of you and figure out if you've tapped into everything you need. And again, those grants too, that's new. There's so many savvy moms out there who've created such great products, and dads. There's savvy dads out there too. But there's great products out there that just weren't available to help people fund, because insurance only pays so much. And then you're like me, and you never qualified for Social Security or Medicaid because, you know, our family made too much when he was under 18. So let's get creative and see what your issues are, and let's see how we can help you.
Yes, absolutely. I really appreciate it. Does anybody have any more questions before we close off? No, okay. Yeah, I would love to. I think a lot of families will be interested in covering both those workshops if you have the time to do that. This information is very valuable, and it's a much needed resource for this, for disability planning. Thank you for helping the families navigate this important process. Where could families go and get the information if they want to hire a special needs attorney? Would they just go to this QR code over here?
Yeah, go to that QR code. I'll help you find one for your area. And again, I'm just your partner in that. I don't have any skin in the game with your attorney, so you can choose who you want, but I just want to make sure you choose someone that, you know, you at least have the information that they're experienced in elder law or special needs trust.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. We
Welcome.
appreciate you so much.
You're welcome. And we'll send you out the slides. You'll get some information from my staff member, Patty, so that you can get that email with the slides and information.
Wonderful.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you everyone for coming. Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.